Good morning, my friends. Welcome to another revisitation or commentary of Star Trek, the role-playing game produced by FASA back in the day. Back in the day when I was a young man. This is Breakfast with a Famine, or could be. Sun just finally came up. The previous two videos I did was in the dark, more or less. It is 45 degrees, and there's no heat in this truck yet. We're still waiting on parts. Will eventually happen. I got another 20 minutes or so before somebody shows up and opens the bloody door so I can do this job. I've been sitting here probably a better part of an hour. So my question or subject topic for this particular video is Star Trek, to command or not to command. When we played this and when I ran it back in the mid 80s, early 90s, one of the key reoccurring problems we had was that, unlike a lot of other RPGs, space-based RPGs, sci-fi, Star Wars is an example, you don't have, in general, a command structure. It's generally, in Star Wars, if you think about it, it's just a space-based futuristic version of a hack and slash, of a fantasy role-playing game system, where you see a lot of commonality, where in our case we see things like psionics and mind power versus the Force in lieu of magic and God powers. The God supported clerical powers, right? And we see technology that gives us the equivalence of the fancy weaponry and so on. So it's just a futuristic version of an archaic RPG. Star Trek sets itself out in a number of different ways, starting with it has a really thick TV and movie base to build the universe. So we know the universe, and it's set in our own universe just up the road in the future. And I've previously stated I'm of the opinion most of the primary alien races that are encountered in Star Trek are just mirror images of certain portions of the human psyche and mindset. That's just my opinion. My opinion, young Padawan. Oh, wait, sorry. Young Vulcan. See, I can't even do that anymore. You used to be able to do it. You used to do pretty well. If you don't practice, you lose it. And there's some truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that, right? So, one of our problems we ran into, and I've done a video on this before, at least once or twice, perhaps as part of the 30-day challenge kind of thing, is that traditionally, if you're following the captain arc, Captain Kirk, Captain Janeway, so on and so forth, you've got a person in charge and a bunch of junior officers attached to that person. And unless you have a very understanding playing group, or a solid one, where everybody gets it, that Joe over here or Lynn over here are going to be the one in charge, and then you're supposed to act upon what they say in general. Hopefully they're not dictators, so it can become problematic. My experience was the best way to approach this was to have the senior officer staff of a starship be NPCs. And then the player characters were members or crew people of the starship. So it was them that got tasked to go do away missions or to do encounters, first contact, that kind of stuff. Because, frankly, they're red shirts. They're not that they're disposable, but that is the gist of it, that as junior officers, it's good for them to be exposed to things that the senior officers have probably earned their right not to be. Although, if in tradition of Star Trek, that's not how it usually works. Picard, even against Riker's utter wishes on many occasions, led away teams and went on missions that, especially as the series progressed, that by rights he should have been court-martialed for doing. You're the head of a ship with 1,000 crew and passengers on board. The last thing you should be doing is gallivanting around some alien world in the back alley someplace, potentially getting exposed to God knows what and how many different things. Just saying, right? Risking your life or what? And your leadership isn't needed back on the ship. It just made it simpler. It also allowed us to make it easier. So if one of the characters did get offed by mistake, there was potential hundreds of other replacements just waiting to be beamed down. So it wasn't that big of a stretch to have them concoct a new character and have that character be jumped into an existing group and not be totally a fish out of water. There's some advantages to having a starship of crew members, a pool of players to potentially pull upon. And while your latest incarnation may not be as popular or well known to your group, but it won't be totally completely different to the point where nobody can work with you. It just makes it more convenient. So, of the opinion that it was better to do it that way, to have the captain and maybe the senior crew members, the chief medical officer, the agent, the chief engineer, and so on like that be NPCs, and that the characters be subordinates to them. They could be the next tier, right? Next down junior officers. I can't help but notice. I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube lately on Star Trek in general, and I've noticed a bunch of references, especially when they were talking about casualties during the Dominion War, that it seems to be somewhere in the new canon it's become acceptable that these starships with hundreds and hundreds of crew members on board are completely crewed by officers. That every member of the starship is an officer. When, if you go back to the original TV series and some of those early movies, it's definitely FASA's role-playing game. That's not true. Probably 10 or 15% of the crew are officers. The rest are, naval non-commissioned officers and technicians. These are people who did not go through the academy per se, but they went through an engineering school or trade school or what have you. They went through a Starfleet sponsored technical training program, what have you. The Navy equivalent of security, which everybody calls red shirts, Starfleet security, so on and so forth, had its own training facility, and they were not all junior officers. Now we're not all ensigns and lieutenant commanders. So I'm not sure where and how that got diverted into a common, more current canon, and I think it's a questionable one at that. But there you have it, in a nutshell, my opinion on how to basically run a good game from in the beginning. If you're going to begin with not having one single person be, quote, in charge. There you have it. Till next time, game on.